Welcome to the Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud podcast. As instructional coaches and school leaders, you are tasked with guiding continuous teacher growth to create student success. This podcast looks to support you with strategies from experienced guests, as well as my own insights that I've gathered over the years. I'm thrilled to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in. Trust-based observations. Joining our podcast today is Craig Randall, the author of Trust-Based Observations, Maximizing Teaching and Learning Growth. Craig has been a school counselor, teacher, coach, and principal. He has developed a transformative model of teacher observation that focuses on strengths and building differentiated, trusting relationships with each teacher. He does this in order to create environments where teachers feel safe, embrace taking risk, and experimenting with new practices. The results are improved teaching and learning and the development of a school-wide culture of trust and care that extends to the students. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you here. The initial conversation that you and I had shared with me that we have a lot of similar thinking. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. I'm wondering, for starters, if you would just give people a quick definition of trust-based observation before we jump into it in greater detail later.
Sure. Maybe the elevator speech, as they say, or something. But really, the way we've been doing observations for the last 25 years, research shows is literally not improving teaching, and research shows causes harm and makes teachers feel less confident in their practice. And if we want collective teacher efficacy and improvement, we shouldn't be doing something that's making people feel less confident in their practice. And so accidentally, not on purpose, like, aha, I know how to solve this problem. I developed this new way of doing teacher observations. It started in my principal supervision class, where we do 20-minute observations. They're unannounced. We see you once every 3 to 4 weeks. Teachers actually like that they're unannounced when they know it's strengths-based, because they don't have to worry. And we have nine just core areas of pedagogy we look at. And then the real magic is the next day in the reflective conversation, where we work diligently to build trust with teachers so they do feel safe taking risks. And it sounds counterintuitive during the reflective conversation because we're so used to teachers being fearful and worrying about their score, but we eliminate the rating of pedagogy, focus on strengths, ask them about their practice to start instead of telling, and it makes a dramatic difference in the way teachers respond, and it makes them really eager to try new things and grow like they were when they were young teachers against some of those that maybe have become a little more set in their ways. That's my brief definition of trust-based observations.
It's great. It's great. And as I listen to you and I look at your background, I'm guessing that there has to be some connection between being a counselor, a teacher, and a coach, going along with your principalship. Some combination of that led to your development of the process.
I think definitively the counselor part. I think at the core, I've always been caring and wanting to make a difference, and I think I've always been kind. And people, like, remember my first serious girlfriend saying I'm so nice, which I cringed at, but I embrace it now. And so I think that factors into it for sure, just like who I am. And just, I think I have strong emotional intelligence, and I think just understanding how people work. I think my teacher background, in terms of my own experiences, even with good observations and things that I felt were wrong with it, if I'm being dead honest about the coaching, I cringe at the way I coached. I was way more of a yeller than I would be now. It was so anti-trust-based observations. In many ways, I wish I could go back and relive that with everything I know now about trust-based observations.
That's interesting.
I didn't know then. That's my guilty admission. So
cool. Well, in my coaching work, I'm real big on the connection between conversation and reflection. And
Yeah.
I sense I'm hearing that a lot from you, that's what creates what I label as insights and learning. And so I'm guessing that in your work, asking and listening are pretty critical.
We talked about that reflective conversation piece and that being so key to it. But even then you have to set the conditions so people feel comfortable talking. And Brene Brown talks about the connection between vulnerability, trust, and risk taking. And she says vulnerability isn't necessarily a bad thing. If it's too high, it's almost a warning signal, similar to the amygdala. And she suggests that the way we lower vulnerability so people feel comfortable taking risks is by building trust. And she says that we do that by the little trust building actions that we take. And she has a great analogy thinking about a jar, and because trust takes time, and every little action we do is putting a marble in that jar, and that marble has to fill, or that marble has to fill, that jar has to fill in order for teachers to feel safe. And so just before we get to the questions, there's just a couple little things I think are an important piece because they tie into them feeling comfortable with the questions. So we have the reflective conversation, the first marble, as we call it, in the teacher's room because they feel safer in their own room as opposed to our office. We always say whether you're 7, 17, or 37, getting called to the principal's office feels like getting called to the principal's office. And we think it's going to be bad, even if it's going to be something good. And then the next thing that we do when we get to the room, the next marble, is we ask permission. Hey, is now a good time? They always say yes, but that little courtesy, it builds trust. And the next marble is we sit beside you, not across from you, because it makes you more comfortable. The next marble is we share the form with you. And then the next marble before we ask the questions, and then I'll get into the questions next. I know it's a long answer to your question, is that we tell them what the goal of trust-based observations is. And we just say that the goal is for me and everyone else that does observation to build enough trust with you and everyone else in the building so that any one of us can come into your classroom, observe you, see you trying something new, and even though it's highly unlikely, have that thing you're trying be a train wreck. But as opposed to a traditional observation where you'd be freaking out that this was happening today on observation day of all days, you wouldn't be worried because you already know the next day when I come to your room, I'm going to say, Steve, I love it that you were trying something new. That's how we get better. It's not always going to work the way we plan, but trying is the key thing. And then we just say, because when we've created those conditions, you and everyone else will persist in taking risk. And that's where we're going to see the growth. And now getting to the questions.
Before you go to the questions, Craig,
Yeah.
You hit on something that I haven't found a lot of other people talking about that I discovered accidentally.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in my coaching work, I'm doing a pre-conference with the person before I go to do the coaching.
Yeah.
And I made that big discovery difference it made when I sat next to the person instead of across the table. And I'm right-handed, so I have them seated on my right, and I have my notepad between the two of us because I found I just can't be very good at coaching if I'm not taking notes. And it's not even so much that I go back and look at the notes, but the fact that I write them down, make it stick in my head. But the difference when they were sitting next to me and they were looking at the notes I was writing down. And when I'm out doing training, I'll stop people in the middle and I'll have them just move the furniture and start again. And they frequently report back on the big difference that communication piece makes.
Well, and look, you're also demonstrating transparency because you're letting them see the notes too. So it's not hiding anything with them. And look, if we think about teachers and their sense or desire for autonomy, it's super strong. I mean, the classic, just let me close my door and do my own thing. I mean, we all know that. And there's truth in that but I think they also want support. And so, but I'm going to draw an analogy, and I don't think it's a bad analogy, is that compare that to a teenager and their sense of autonomy, right? Because it's developmental that we need to become independent. And I'm drawing a connection between that and sitting beside someone. Like my daughter, 14 to 17, she was a textbook definition of sullen teenager. And she wouldn't talk about anything. It was the proverbial pulling teeth. Somehow, though, we're sitting in the car and she's in the front seat beside me. And all of a sudden, she'll start talking. there's something about it, whether it's a teenager or a teacher or really anyone that factors into that.
Cool. Cool. So go ahead with what you want to
Okay.
talk.
So we start with two questions. The first question we ask is, what were you doing pedagogically speaking? And then we add, what strategies were you using? Because pedagogy doesn't ring necessarily with everyone. So what strategies were you using to help students learn? But even then, we add a trust marble to that question. And we just say, we definitely want to hear about the 20 minutes you were in there. But we all know sometimes when we get observed, you'll think, you came in now, you just missed the best part, or you laughed right before the best part. And we always just say, if that happened, please tell us that too. And it's amazing how that little statement makes teachers go, oh, thank you. That builds trust. And so we take down their answers and we actually work to reframe their answers into the pedagogical language of the form, which makes them more purposeful. And teachers actually like that you reframe their language, by the way, which sounds like something they wouldn't like, but they do. And then we share the answers back, which also demonstrates that we've been actively listening to what they're saying. And then we ask if there's anything else. And it's pretty amazing when we ask if there's anything else right after we've shared it, how that will bring more up. The second question we ask is, if you had the chance to reteach the lesson, what, if anything, might you have done differently? And we have another trust marble for that. And we just say, look, teaching is hard. Sometimes when we teach, we nail it. When that happens, we want to celebrate it. And I never want you to feel like you have to manufacture an answer to that question just because I'm asking. At the same time, though, we know most of the time we tend to think, oh, I wish I would have, or oh, I know next time I'm going to. And then we ask the question again, and we take down their answers again, and we share them back again. And we think this last little bit is a reverse trust marble in the jar, because this is about what you might have done differently. We don't ask, is there anything else, like we do in the first question, because we think if we do, they'll think, oh, what did I do wrong? And that will inhibit trust building. But those two questions, and starting by asking and saying, really, in essence, saying, I value you as a professional and what you have to say, that matters to me. It changes the tone of the whole conversation, especially when we follow up by sharing all the strengths that we saw afterwards.
I love the focus on what did I miss before and after. And my greatest despise was districts who were trying to work on teacher evaluation being identical principal to principal, and I'd get this line: if you didn't see it, it didn't happen.
It drives me crazy. There are districts out there now where, like, brand new teachers, they get observed. And if you don't see it, instead of a brand new teacher spending their extra time doing planning, they're required to document and show how I do this thing that you didn't see. Like, what value or good comes from something like that?
So, in our earlier conversation and some time I spent on your website, I know that you work around 9 areas of pedagogy, and I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about how you arrived at those as a focus.
Yeah. I'll tell you a little story about that, actually. So we scripted it first, and that's what my mentor taught me, and so that's what we did. And along the way, people would say, "But how do you know? How do you know what you're seeing or good teaching?" It's like, I just know. And so there were some prods along the way, and then I worked with a superintendent that I'm not always the easiest person because of my passion to. No, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, maybe I should say, because of my passion. And this, I was not this person's cup of tea, and I won't even say undeservedly so. And so, but she had her mind made up about me and would do little things to, I would say, get me. And one of them that she did was, she said, look, there's no evidence that scripting does anything to improve teaching and learning. So either you adopt Danielson or Marzano or create your own. And I didn't know what I know now about the harm that rating pedagogy causes, but just intuitively, it felt bad. And so that actually started the creation of the form. And I just, the assistant principals I was with, we kind of created it. And I also knew, like, really long lists were bad. And we just ended up with these 9 areas of pedagogy. And then at the next school I was at, we refined them. And it just sort of a group of educators got together and talked about what's core, like what are the most core areas, because you can't cover everything, and really that's what they are. Do you want me to name them or not?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
So it's learning targets or learning intentions or learning objective or the essential question, whatever language you want to have. One of the other things, by the way, that we have sitting next to that is we always do a student interview where we ask the student, what are they supposed to be learning? Why does it have value in the real world? And then sort of that meta question, how do you know when you've learned it? And so we've got that. We've got teacher student rapport and relationship, classroom behavior management. We have cooperative learning, and we have working memory, cognitive load capacity. We have higher order thinking and questioning skills. We have formative assessment or checks for understanding, and descriptive progress feedback, which those two tend to go together. And we have differentiation. And then we actually have, it's not an area of pedagogy, but we subdivide it into the 8 main ways that we help teachers learn. It's called the learning principles. And it's a little pyramid, and we track where you're at and show you where you spend your time in the areas that are more receptive or active. So things like lecture or direct instruction, audio visual, demonstration and modeling, reading, which could be receptive or active depending on how it happens, class discussion, which could be the same way, pair team discussion, learning by doing and teaching others. And so that all together creates the form. It's really visual. Teachers love the visual nature of it, and it makes them really reflect. Just real quickly, when we finish a round, when we're training a school, we always ask the teachers, hey, what do you think of this new model? And what do you want to talk about in comparison to others? And they say 2 things primarily. One, it's so great to have my bucket filled with strengths because they're not used to that. But the number one thing they say is, I'm already thinking about what to get better at without you even saying anything. And somehow the positive nature combined with that visual nature of the form makes their wheels start spinning.
So does the visual nature of the form cause them to reflect on things that maybe you didn't even address, that it's there in front of them?
It really does. So one of the other trust marbles that we say is, we always just say the absence of is not a negative. So if we didn't fill something in, it just means we didn't happen to see it, or it wasn't appropriate to that lesson. But the form is highly detailed. Actually, when people first see it, it becomes quite daunting to them, like at first glance. But when we train you, we do mastery training. So by the end of the week, you've filled out that form 12 or 14 times. So it's nothing. And so they'll see, like, maybe their questions only went up to analyze. So evaluate, synthesize, or create weren't filled in. And it could be perfectly appropriate to that lesson, but they'll start going, oh, I need to start adding those questions into my practice. Yeah, but for sure that only happens because of the positive nature of it. So they don't feel threatened. So then they can self-reflect. If I'm feeling defensive, I'm not going to allow myself to do that. So it all ties together.
So my experience would say that most administrators would find the process you're bringing to them substantially more rewarding than the traditional observation evaluation. But I'm wondering, how do you address the time? I sense you're looking at people spending substantially more time in classrooms observing than
I don't think so, really.
No, okay.
So, but it's a great question, and so I'm going to say a few things. It is way more rewarding. No one likes to put checkbox of numbers, and we all know if I have to give somebody a number that's below proficient, or a word that's below proficient, that the teacher's not going to appreciate that. And so I don't like to have to say that. And so it gives me anxiety even leading the conversation, knowing that I have to share those numbers with somebody. And so when I don't have to do that, and then when my teachers respond so positively, it's not uncommon for us the first time through to get tears of joy because it's so foreign to have that. So all of a sudden, it's easier to do observations when they're fun versus the way we've had to do before.
Even proficient doesn't fly.
No. I've had numerous people that we've trained say, when I realized I can't do this anymore is when my best teacher cried because I gave them proficient. I'm like, something is wrong with our system when that happens. And it's not on the teacher, it's that system, and it's well-intended. They're all well-intended. I don't have anything bad to say about their intentions. So what I will say is, I was talking to Kim Marshall, and who does teacher observation himself. And he was telling me that in Chicago public schools, to do one round of Danielson, with the pre-observation conference, all the time that I need to go into the write-up afterwards, doing the observation, all the time that I needed to write up afterwards, having the post-observation conference, and then the final write-up takes 6 hours for one formal observation.
Wow.
So if we're saying we have a 20-minute observation and a 20-minute reflective conversation, that's saying we can do 9 observations and reflective conversations in the time that it takes to do one. So with our normal load that we've got in a school, there's exceptions, but you can really see somebody once every 3 to 4 weeks and spend between like 40 and 80 minutes a day. And so altogether, if I'm saying that's 5 hours a week out of my time, but this is the first thing I'm doing that truly moves the dial. And at the same time, it creates a culture of trust where my teachers are happy. And in a time of teacher shortage, my teachers want to stay and my retention efforts are better. Like it's not really more time, but we do. But getting into visits is always hard. You have to make yourself do it. It's like working out.
I'm wondering, schools that have instructional coaches and teacher leaders, you have ways that you encourage the administrators to tap that as a resource?
Yeah, and obviously we see schools all over the world that have all kinds of different models. And in the UK, there's much more of that mid-tier leadership, and we have schools that have instructional coaches and don't. And I never dictate what somebody should do; it's their building. But when you have instructional coaches, if you've got mid-tier people, you can have them do some of the observations too. And so it's up to you what you want to do, but that's definitely how some people choose to do it. Some people say, but no, they're content experts. It's not for me to say. What I will say is one of the other core elements, because trust takes time to fill that jar with marbles, is that we don't begin to offer suggestion until the 4th visit. There's exceptions if you're a brand new teacher and your classroom management's a trainer, or if you saw something super egregious. But when we offer suggestions to teachers, traditionally what we do in the role of the traditional observation is tell somebody to get better at something, oftentimes without even telling them what to do to get better, or perhaps at best by sending them an article and saying, here you go. And I just say, where in the world would we as a teacher say to a 3rd grader, hey, those multiplication facts need work. Here's a times table. I'll see you in a month. We would never do that. There's an astounding hypocrisy between the way we expect teachers to give feedback, suggestive growth feedback to students, and the way that we tend to do it as observers. And so when we offer suggestions, first we ask permission to offer suggestions. It's a little courtesy. They always say yes, but it builds trust and makes them more willing to not feel like it's strategic compliance, but own it and be a part of it. But the way we guide you through that process is way more like we want teachers to do with students, or way more like an instructional coach does, except that we're offering the suggestion. And so that piece there, a principal can do that, but when you have an instructional coach, I think that's a perfect place to hand over or start to work in collaboration, then to let the instructional coach be able to do that piece as well.
So working with an instructional coach in between the sessions of the principal coming back could create a great opportunity when the principal comes back and does the next observation, that the teacher's been able to implement the change because of the support of the instructional coach.
For sure. And I'll even just guide you really quickly through what that process looks like. Let's just say the area that I wanted you to work on, Steve, was adding reflection processing activity in the working memory cognitive load section. So at the end of the 4th visit, I would ask permission to offer that suggestion. I would then say, great. And I'd probably have an electronic and a paper copy. One of the cool things about the observation form is it's a professional development resource with hyperlinks. So the tools are right at your fingers for growth, or your fingertips for your keyboard, I guess. And so there's one article on there that lists 78 different structures that could be used for these little reflection processing activities. And I'd say, Steve, let's choose 6 or 8 of them that you think are really great. And then we're going to say, well, great. Let's pull up. If you were just going to try this in one of your classes tomorrow, which one? Let's pull up that lesson. So your kids are high schoolers, their cognitive load is 10 minutes. Where do you think there's fairly natural places in there that we could stop and build in that reflection processing activity? Great. Which one of these 6 or 8 areas would you want to add into this one? And then we say, okay, so when we teach it tomorrow, I could model it for you. We could co-teach it. You could teach and I can watch and give suggestive feedback in the moment or later. And then we go and do that. And then we have another follow-up conversation where we ask, what went well? What would you like to keep working on? And then how can I build that? What can I do to support you? So by the time I see you next month, that's built into your practice fully. You can hand that over to the instructional coach. And really that's their wheelhouse, right? Is all that kind of stuff. So in some ways, if you're blessed enough to have those resources, that's the perfect place to combine that. And as we're sometimes with the instructional coach and the principal relationship, to the teacher, it can feel like, oh, you're trying to manipulate or work me, and you're not really having my best interest at heart. But when we built that trust in there, it changes that format completely. So it's like, oh, great, let's do it. Come on, Steve, help me out.
Yeah, yeah. So one question emerged as I look through your material. I was wondering, are there ways that you have to run into a contractual or legal issue about teacher evaluation when a system's adopted what you're doing?
Sometimes. Not when we're in independent or international or private or religious schools, but when we're talking like in the US, after Race to the Top, federal funding got tied to stricter teacher evaluation laws, and it's complicated and it's a long process. And my goal is to change legislation. We think when we get one state changed, it'll start to roll over. And so sometimes you have to finesse, and which, look, I think it's ridiculous, but what do we do in the meantime if I want to make a difference?
Yeah.
So different places do different things. Like we have a district in the Bronx, a school in the Bronx that we work with, and they're still required to do a modified Danielson. And so they keep the Danielson form open. And when they feel it's a really good one that ticks all the boxes, boom, now it's done. Some of them just say, hey, let's just make an agreement. We're just going to give everybody proficient. We're going to put it in the drawer. Now we're going to do what we want to do. Some of them, so there's like years where you're on the where you get to choose what you want to do for 5 years, and then every 6th year. And so for the 5 years when you're doing that, they'll just say, okay, let's just choose professionalism. So it's not anything related to pedagogy. Then on the 6th year, look, we just got to do it. Another district we work with says, okay, so the year we have to do this, I'll be your observer for the TBO, but somebody else will be your evaluation thing. And look, we're just doing what we have to do. And I think it's silly, but I don't know what to do in the meantime.
I worked with an administrator years ago his goal was to have all the teacher evaluations done by the end of October.
Oh yeah.
And then he'd spend the rest of the year working in growth.
Oh, okay, right. In a positive way, because that works the other way too. It's like, good, I'm done for the year. And
no. It was that was his way to build the trust with the teacher. Okay, you know from October on it's coaching because your evaluation's already been done and put away. I've worked with an administrator who had teachers fill in their evaluation and come and meet with them if he agreed they were done and put away. But in other words, there were ways to legalistically meet that requirement. And release people where they had to go.
But I do believe in long term we're going to get this change. I mean, the research says the Gates Foundation and the Annenberg study say it's not improving teaching and learning. We have all this information, and I'm not sure a lot of legislators know that. And so, and change is hard, but we're going to keep plugging away until we get one law changed.
So what was going through my head as I was asking you the question, and I hadn't thought about this before, but it's almost like the districts that move to a proficiency scales for students to meet standards. But they're in a district that requires ABCD grades, so they get to the end and they have to come up with some calculation. Turn a grade in, but it's a workaround.
There's similarities, in that for sure.
Yeah. So I know that you got a dream and a passion here. You want to just kind of close us out with where you're hoping to go with what you're looking to make happen.
I want safe spaces for teachers to be able to take risks and experiment. I want Look, I've been really lucky. John Hattie, Michael Fullen, Carol Dweck, some pretty big name people have endorsed trust-based observations. And John Hattie says that trust-based observations is collective teacher efficacy in action. We know that's the highest effect size by a lot. We know that teaching is hard work. So much harder even post-COVID with the increase in behaviors that we have, and let alone, managing electronics and all of that. And so we have to honor that, and we have to value teachers. And if we really, really want to see growth, that our job is to prepare students to be successful adults and do everything in our power for that to happen. I do not have all the answers for how to make education better. I think most teachers combined have all the answers. But that's only going to work if they feel like they're in a space where they can experiment and say, hey, I got this idea and might work, might not. And so my goal is to make this the way really around the world. I know it sounds silly, the way we do observations. I want this to be the predominant way because it's better. Teachers love it. They feel happier. They feel supported. They grow more. That's my goal.
And kids do better with a happy teacher for sure.
That too.
Well, Craig, I was looking for our conversation, and it lived up to any expectation that I had. I really appreciate you joining me. What's the best way for listeners to follow up with you, kind of stay on top of the work that you're doing?
Yeah, well, there's the trustbase.com website, and you can contact me on that, or you can email me at craig@trustbase.com. But all the social media sites, LinkedIn and everything, my handle is trust-based Craig, or you can look up Craig Randall and find me and see my posts or whatever we're doing. I also have a podcast called 20 Minutes of Teaching Brilliance on the road with trust-based observations, where when I'm on the road training, we'll see teachers doing amazing stuff. And I interview them to talk about their amazing stuff so teachers can learn from each other too. So that's another avenue for people to learn.
We'll put your website and email in the lead into the podcast. Make it easier for folks.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve.
Take care.
Appreciate it. You too. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barkley, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barkleypd.com.